Welcome to Grome House Museum's podcast, At Home with the Picts, A Crafted Legacy. I am your host, storyteller Eileen Budd, and throughout this podcast I will be taking you on a journey with me around Scotland and beyond, exploring Grome House Museum's collection, speaking to contemporary craftspeople, artists and musicians whose work uses the same or similar techniques to the Picts. In this podcast, we will meet stone carvers, weavers and carnix players. We will speak to academics, archaeologists and blacksmiths, and together explore how the Picts lived and how they made their art. Because, as George Bain once said, theory may inform, but practice convinces. The rock carving episode. The most enduring piece of Pictish history, or rather the thing we know them best for, are their sculptured stones. These incredible pieces of art, inscribed with animals, warriors and mythical beasts, have captured our imaginations. And it's not just the art on the stones, it's the sheer size of them too. In Scottish folklore, there are many stories of huge stones in the landscape. Standing stones were especially thought of as having otherworldly powers. We have records of stones being used in folk traditions around fertility, childbirth, marriage, and the changing of the seasons. Other stories are told of stones that answered a people's cry for help during a famine or plague, with mysterious white cows appearing by the stones and providing enough milk for the entire village to survive throughout winter. Interestingly, in ancient times, a breed of white cattle is said to have roamed wild in Scotland's Caledonian forest, and the cows were similar to today's cadzo or ling cattle. Perhaps these were the cows that the Picts knew and carved images of into their stones. And speaking of stones, in this episode I went to visit a master stone carver who specialises in recreating Pictish sculptured stones, David McGovern.
My name's David McGovern and I'm a heritage stone carver.
Thank you so much, David, for your time and showing me around the workshop today. Tell me, how did you get into this?
How did I get into this? God, so I was a pretty strange teenager, yeah. I was obsessed with Pictish art, always interested, always pestering parents to take me to see the stones Aberlemno and always enjoyed the aesthetics of it. The first thing I ever carved was a piece of field stone that I carved with a Pictish crescent and V-rod with a sharpened screwdriver and a camping mallet to try and fool my pals into thinking I'd found one. It still lies in my garden somewhere under a hedge. And then once I started doing it, because I was doing it really to try and work out how they did it, right? I just wanted to understand how did that feel to create the kind of thing that I loved to see. And once I started, I just couldn't stop.
Fantastic.
I'm sure this is common to lots of people who spend a lot of time learning techniques to do things. You go from thinking, how do I solve that problem, to instinctively solving it. Because it's technique and muscle memory, and then it leads your brain on to the next step. And then before you know it, you've solved a problem without thinking about it. So I think that's an important sort of stage in your development as a carver or an artist or a musician or whatever. It's only once you start spending a lot of time doing the thing. I mean, it is true you need to spend, what does they say, 10,000 hours or something. It is true that investment in time is incredible in bringing you on as a carver. But I just wanted to understand how they did it and how it felt to step back from a creation like that. And I'm happy to report that it's still a great feeling.
Yeah. And give us an example of that kind of problem solving.
I think that it's more in terms of thinking ahead. It's like rock climbing, it's not about what you're doing right now, it's what you're going to do 2 moves ahead that's going to stop you falling off the thing. So most of what I do, because it is based in the traditions of the early medieval of Angus or the late medieval West Highland tradition, is relief carving. So I don't carve in the round. I'm not creating human figures in 3D and things like that. It's more a case of thinking, in terms of how you go down the stone and the various layers and trying to identify those little danger points, those little, you know, points of breakage and things that you want to try and avoid. But the way that I approach a project like this, so this is a replica of the Skinnet cross, is that I design it on the hoof. So I'm using a bit of technology, so I've got photogrammetry scans and things to help try and recreate the thing. And I do it in 3 stages, so I reproduce what we can see, what we know from HES drawings and things like that. And I then look for the things that I can see that other people perhaps haven't seen. And then it's the completely blank areas when you're looking then at context and looking at stones with similar programs of design or in similar areas or in similar styles to try and put it together. So constantly thinking, constantly trying to think about space and whether I've left enough room. And I do take some measurements, so some of it is accurate, particularly the things that we know are there. But when it comes to recreating things, there is a bit of artistic license involved.
Some of the stones in the key patterns, they actually have mistakes in them.
Yeah.
Which I think is really interesting. It adds like a wee human element to it. And also the amount of effort that goes into carving a piece of stone. If you make a mistake, are you going to start again?
You're not. Thankfully, yeah, for someone like me, right, the Picts were pretty loose with a lot of the design stuff, which is absolutely brilliant. So you often get, you know, this idea of perfection belonging only to God, and therefore you put some deliberate mistakes. I think there's an element of that. Whether they were always doing that, I don't know. But there's an awful lot of Pictish design that's really quite loose and riffy. So, you know, they'll start maybe with a key pattern and you can tell straight away. I'm thinking of stones like Golspie 1. It's got this wonderful key pattern at the bottom that kind of riffs into something else and then comes back again. So it's almost as if they're not doing that George Bain thing of starting with a grid and working out the maths. Instead, they've got this, you know, sort of loose approach to it where they're sort of seeing where it'll take them. And that's magic. And I've tried to recreate that in some of the more contemporary things that I've done in a Pictish style. So, you know, where I produce a brand new monument that follows Pictish conventions, but also tries to follow that looseness thing. I'm thinking of a stone that we did at Brechin where I designed the interlace and the spirals and the frame around it as we went, which meant going into every corner with a completely different approach. I mean, you know, proper artists will tell you that that's absolute madness, and it was, but it was great fun and a great intellectual challenge, and it was trying to recreate a little bit of that looseness of Pictish sculpture that I absolutely love.
No, I think that the fact that you're working with an organic material as well,
you
can see the advantage of, as you're working, you know, you find like a flaw or like a bit of, I don't know, silica. Yeah. And you have to kind of work your way around it. So the pattern might change because, you know, technically to kind of chip it out wouldn't work.
Absolutely the same thing that they were doing, you know, and you see it all the time. I mean, there's faults in this stone, there's little play holes, there's little bits that we'll have to be very careful about. But even in this cross arm, you know, I had a wee wry smile when I got into this bit here because it's subtly different to the other 3 of these spirals. And I'm thinking to myself, how are you going to get out of there? Because this is a bit that the reference material isn't great because it's so badly worn in this area. But you can see they just get away with keeping to the overs and unders and escaping back out, you know, into the centre of the cross. And it's fabulous because you can tell that it's not been meticulously planned. It's not been sitting with a graph paper, measuring all out and making sure that the maths are right. But the maths is right, but it's only right in this very sort of analogy, riffy sort of way. It's fantastic. And it's a wonderful freedom that it gives a sculptor in working in this area, because this is a bit where I'm not just recreating slavishly something from a Royal Commission drawing. I'm trying to recreate the problem and solve it, in a similar way to the original sculptor. And that gives you a real insight into their approach to it. And I hope they enjoyed doing that and solving that as much as I did.
The artists
and absolute artists they were. You know, if you look at what's going on in, say, Ireland at the same time, it's all religion. You know, it's all high crosses and it's all scenes from the Bible and all the rest of it. But over in old Pictavia, right, they're still producing these wonderful things with elements of a missing mythology and the wandering man and all these Pictish symbols that survive into the Christian era. There is no counterpart to that anywhere else in these islands, you know. And therefore, to be a Pictish stone carver with that love of novelty, because again, you never see two, like, you very rarely see two Pictish symbols that bear any relationship to each other. You know, there's the shape and there's the form and there's the rules, and then there's the freestyly stuff going on in the middle. And it's the same with Pictish beasties and all the rest of it, all the great symbols. The variation is incredible. That novelty was clearly very, very important to that Pictish world.
That's really interesting. So have you noticed then, when you're looking at the actual stones, the real stones, do you think that was a different artist, that must have been made by somebody else?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you go into one of the great collections, so you go to St Vigins, you can see the stones that I think were probably carved by the same artist. You can be fairly sure. Same at Meagle. You know, so where you've got collections in the one place, you can very much see it. You very rarely see two stones, like even the smaller stones. I'm thinking there's one at Kingoldrum that's very similar to one at Kirriemuir. But that's about it. You know, apart from that, it's all varied. The variation is incredible. I mean, you can go to Ireland and you can see crosses that look the same. You think, well, they've come out of the same workshop, because they are, you know, showing the same things. In Pictland, you very rarely see even two basic symbols in the same area that look the same. There's always this great variation, this great imagination going on.
And when you think about the Pictish kingdom of Fortier, which, you know, Angus was a part of it was all the way down right into Fife, wasn't it? Like from the very top to the very bottom. That's a huge swathe of land.
Yeah.
And lots of different people there, probably quite spread out as well.
Yeah.
And for there to be that variation that you're talking about in those different areas, do you think they were, we know that they were trading, do you think there was some skilled trading going on as well?
Well, it's always been easier to move a craftsman than to move a stone, right? So, you know, I have absolutely no doubt at all that there were workshops, right? So, but I think there would also be this itinerant craft population as well, because you see that carrying on. You know, if you look at Ireland in the early 20th century, it still had stone carver workshops pretty much in every town. There's a wonderful book, Stone Mad, by Seamus Murphy, where he describes these itinerant workers. They call them the Brothers of the Dust. And they're wandering from town to town, and they're not seen as tramps the way we would see somebody who doesn't stay in one place today. They're literally wandering around, and their skills are recognised. So it's known that when they walk into a workshop that, oh, that's so and he's really good at Virgin Marys, or he's really good at foliage, or you know, they'd be famous throughout the craft. And when they came into a workshop, they were either given some work to do, or the men would chuck in a shilling. They called it a national, and they would get them a pint and something to eat, because they knew that network of support was there for them as they wandered around. And I imagine in the medieval world, particularly the late medieval world, when you look at the stones that have been produced on the west coast, but no reason to think that it wasn't happening in the early medieval world as well, that you had this element of people, you know, who were well known in a network and places they could travel to safely to go and carry out commissions on behalf of church, aristocracy, whatever. But plainly there was a world of support for that craft population, because otherwise you just wouldn't see that variation. But I do think it comes back to that appreciation of novelty, an appreciation of almost an analogy approach to things within insular art, like interlace and key pattern. I mean, obviously there are stones where it's very, very formal and they have laid out a grid, but there's so many stones where they haven't. There has to be a reason for that. And I think it's part of that appreciation of novelty within the rules and the conventions of a symbol set. You know, there is a completely, you know, set down set of rules somewhere, you know, that people are following, even if it's in their minds. But it allows that novelty and that expression within it.
The fact that, yeah, having some kind of like support, having that recognition of the importance of artwork and creativity, imagination, fluidity in something so solid, that juxtaposition, I think, is a marvellous thing. To create something out of something else.
Yeah, and it's a pretty intransigent material, you know.
Yeah.
When you look at the Maiden Stone or something like that, or the stone at Elgin Cathedral, hewn out of granite, and I avoid granite like the plague, So for them to be producing incredible pieces of art out of granite, it's amazing. I also wonder as well. I mean, I have no doubt at all that there was a support of a professional type of person who was a stone carver. But I wonder as well about works that were maybe being produced in monasteries and things, directly by the priesthood. So yeah, there's a lot more work I think needed to be done there, and even just thinking about who was doing this work and who was commissioning it, and why were they allowed such leeway to produce things that were novel.
Yeah. This idea of pulling something new out of something that is like established, it's just this kind of...
It is magic, isn't it?
It is magic, and I think also pulling things out, like pulling patterns, creating, something beautiful. It looks natural, it looks organic, but it's come from a human. Even if it's inspired by nature and things around, it's this, it's magic.
Yeah, and if you look at stones like the Dunfermline stone, in fact, if you look at early medieval art all the way through to the late medieval stuff on the west coast, it's always the same people being commemorated, right? It's priests, it's warriors, it's their wives, it's the aristocracy, it's kings, and it's also blacksmiths, right? Yeah. So this idea that you can produce. I mean, you've got to remember, we didn't really understand what steel was, until kind of Victorian times, to be able to describe what's happening when you make this very brittle form of iron. If you've got people that can make hard iron, right, then they're the guys that you want to bring into the kind of upper levels of your society. And that's why, you see it at places like Keels, where we've got a McFedrin who's commemorated as a blacksmith. And I think it's because they can make this hard iron, which is steel. I mean, there's no Iron Age without being able to make steel, right? Because iron is not particularly useful because it's too soft. Whereas steel, you're bringing the carbon in, you're bringing in the impurities in effect to make it brittle and make it really, really useful as a material. And they're commemorated in stone, because of that, because it's so very useful. I mean, the making of steel, as soon as you can make bellows and charcoal, you can make steel. And you can do it by accident. It's almost like a repeatable mistake, isn't it? That you don't really understand why it's doing that. But by God, it works, So you would keep doing it.
I think the fact that, there are so many artists or blacksmiths who are commemorated in stone, fitting, it's perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was always amazed that, if you think about big stones in the landscape, there would be a time when that big stone would have had a name. Every big stone. Yes. Because it'd be a landmark on your way. Yep. It might be halfway between here and somewhere else, and it would have the name, the halfway stone or something. Yeah. Every major thing in the landscape.
The fact you would have names for these stones, and also that the stones are telling us something, although quite what is part of their mystery, isn't it? So, I mean,
there's a stone up on the hill which people like Anna Ritchie and Isabel Henderson and stuff have always acknowledged is incredibly important. The problem is it's sort of post-Pictish. People love to be able to put things into a category, which I think is part of the reason that we sometimes struggle with ideas of the Picts, because so much is missing. I mean, we've learned so much more in recent years through the works of the Northern Picts Project and things with Professor Noble up in Aberdeen. But there's still big gaps, to be investigated, and some people just don't like the big gaps or the fact they can't categorise things. So the stone up on the hill is called the Camas Cross, with this sort of antiquarian association with a Norse king, which is nonsense. It's nothing to do with the Battle of Barry and all the rest of it. It's very much a Christian monument, and it's got a figure of Christ on it, which is very, very unusual. So it's probably sort of 10th, 11th century. So again, it just doesn't fit nicely into that Pictish period. It's often described as Hiberno Norse, which it isn't really. It's got a bit of probably got a bit of Northumbrian influence in the vine scroll and things. And things like vine scroll, as Isabel Henderson has pointed out, if you went back a couple of 100 years, or even 100 years, even maybe 50, 60 years, people would have a Christian knowledge, and they would understand that the vine scroll was representative of the Eucharist. And we just don't really have that anymore. So we look at these things with this sense of wonder and how mysterious it all is, and an awful lot of it isn't really. With a little bit of investigation. But there is this lingering connection with the foundation legend of St Andrews, and the fact that one of the versions from, I think, the 12th century talks about a place called Monikai, now known as Moniclato, which is often taken to be Monifith. But it could be here, it could be Moniki, it could be that is being remembered as a special place, because it is kind of where you would rest after maybe gaining higher ground as you've crossed the Firth of Tay. So, and it's okay to wonder, about Pictish things, but we have learned an awful lot more in recent years, So I think the best approach is that informed approach, up to date with the research, but with the open-mindedness maybe to entertain some ideas that maybe aren't provable at this point in time.
I keep asking if we're ever going to find a Pictish Rosetta Stone,
Yeah. Well, Dunfermline is as close as we've got so far, because you've got two symbol pairs associated with people up the top, and another symbol pair that seems to have one from each of the two people up above. So a reading of that might be that, that's the son of these two people, and he's inheriting a symbol from each of his parents. So there are hints in there of what that might mean, and then there's been ideas posited about it being a basic alphabet or a basic way of communicating a language. And again, there might be elements of that. Problem with Pictish stuff is that if you have a stone that has, 4 spaces, and 3 of those would lead you to believe that number 4 might just complete the puzzle, I can guarantee you number 4 will be missing. It'll have been chopped off. It'll have been worn away by wind and rain, and that just seems to be the way Pictish studies go. Yeah. The bit that would fill you in, isn't there, or it's contradictory, and it just may be that something meant one thing most of the time, but under a different set of circumstances, you turn it around the other way, and it means something else. And it just seems to me that we're just always going to have to accept that. And I think for some people, the mystery of that is attractive, and for other people, it isn't.
Yeah.
They want to be able to understand it, and if they can't get their head around it, they're not really interested. And that may be what holds interest in Pictish art and Pictish sculpture back a little bit.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's something that is a real challenge for archaeologists, is that as soon as they find something, people go, what does it mean?
Yeah.
What does it tell us? What does it prove?
Yeah.
And it's like, if you don't have any definites, I think there's some archaeologists are kind of pressured into making a judgment call, and then it gets announced, so this proves this, but actually there's so much unknown.
Yeah, it's like the work that Gordon Noble and his team are doing at Birkhead. It's obviously a very complicated site, but the fact that you've found, as they did this year, a ring that looks like an ecclesiastical ring, maybe a bishop's ring or whatever, it doesn't tell you that Birkhead was the seat of a bishopric. It doesn't. No. It tells you that someone was there who dropped the ring.
Exactly, yeah.
And it helps to fill in part of the picture, which is why when all that work, that multi-year work is done, the monograph that will be produced will be incredibly important, in the same way that the work at Port Mahomet told us so much about what was going on there, and the high standard of craftsmanship and things, and the varied different crafts that were being carried out there, told us so much about that site.
Yeah. Let's talk about materials, because you were saying that you avoid granite at all costs.
Aye.
Yeah. What's your preferred material?
Sandstone, fine grained sandstone, every single day of the week. Like this, this is nice and fine grained. It's soft-ish, but it's not so soft that it's going to not last in the Caithness landscape. I'm an Angus laddie, so surrounded by sandstone. Sandstone is stone to me. No, granite's not my thing at all. I've done some work in granite, but I don't enjoy it. So sandstone, most of the time, we just do some work. This is a commercial workshop. We do work in slate, we do work in limestone. But for this kind of work, which is reproducing a sandstone monument. You know, it's going to be sandstone. There aren't that many quarries around, really. We're always a bit limited as to what we can try and match up. We try and be as true as possible to the original material. There also aren't that many quarries that will give me a 9-foot, you know, good quality, foot-thick piece. It's probably worth more to them cutting it up in smaller bits. So it does take a while to source stone. But I'm across the road from a quarry as well at Denfin there, so we do get a fair bit of stone out of there.
Yeah, I bet. When you're looking at the original Pictish stones, do you notice the type of stone that is? Do you think?
Oh,
about
all the
it?
time.
Yeah,
all the time. Yeah. And I did some work. Fabulous chap Nigel Ruckley, geologist who passed away recently. He was very good at identifying stones that had come from the same source. So you'd use I think it's magnetic resonance, thing, and he would be able to say that stone and that stone came from the same place. Wow. That's brilliant, because if you look at, say, the collections at St Vigils, he was able to say, well, these stones came from Balmashanner quarry outside Forfar, and these ones came from a different source. And that's interesting to be able to see why they were using particular types of stone. And mostly it's quality. Mm-hmm. You know, it's that fine-grained, old Devonian sandstone that they were using as a preference to the stuff that they were maybe getting from the coast. Go to Arbroath, you know, it's beautiful red sandstone, but it's coarse. You know, it's not the same stuff when it comes to carving things. So yeah, they were obviously very sensitive to, you know, what material they were using. And I love it. There's a stone at Meagle where you can see that there's an inclusion in the stone and they're sort of carved over it. You know, try to cut through it, and you can also sometimes see where they've taken a line around an inclusion, and they're fabulous because it just takes you right back to to their time. You know, I mean, I've got a stone in the workshop over there. I'll show you in a second. That's a dressed slab. It's come from a Pictish site. It's been prepared for sculpture, and then they've broken the corner off it and built it into the wall. Now, it's not interesting enough to put in a museum, right? Because most people just wouldn't get that, right? I get it because I can put myself there. I can see every chisel stroke. I can see that the Pictish stonemason stood exactly where I would be standing, and there's a connection there to the approach and thinking about how you're gonna work with this thing.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. I love that that there can be that kind of human connection between, you know, an artist who's working with the same material as they were thousands and thousands of years ago. Yeah. And I think as well, sometimes when we're talking about the Picts, people tend to lean in on battles or, you know, hierarchies or, you know, that kind of thing. And something I really wanted to explore more was the artist's side of things, because as an artist working with materials, doing the same job essentially, you're so much closer to an actual, you know, stonemason Pict.
Yeah, I mean,
and the tools. That's what I was going to ask.
These are not complicated machines, right? I mean, it's a sharp stick and a rock to hit it with. You know, that's really where you're coming from. The material I'm using, tungsten carbide tipped chisels. That's the only difference, really. In fact, some of my chisels aren't tungsten carbide; they're just fire sharp. So they're just high carbon steel, which is exactly what they were using. High carbon steel. They weren't using iron. You know, I mean, we did try and make it with a friend, Chris Grant, who's a bladesmith, and we made a couple of iron chisels, and they're useless. But, you know, harden them, you know, with a bit of charcoal and bellows and things, and wow, you make a completely useful tool. So, you know, there's no doubt that's what they were using.
And I just to go back to the other thing that you were saying about how, you know, you could tell, or the man could tell with his magnetic resonator device.
Thing.
Straight out of Star Trek, he could tell where the stone was and the similarities, because again, you know, thinking about that huge kingdom, and there's itinerant workers, you know, you've got those like stones in this place, right, we'll go to there, we'll make something, or maybe commission somebody to come down and, right, we've got this piece of stone, like, come here, look, could you make something out of this?
Yeah. But look at where all the best sculpture is. It's where the best stone is. I mean, you do get places that have got really rubbish stone for carving that have sculpture. I'm thinking of places like Fortivia, Glen Lyon. The predominant stone around there is schisty stuff that you just wouldn't use. But the sculpture there has come from somewhere else.
Yeah.
Or the stones come from somewhere else. It may have been carved there, but they've brought stone in. But because you've got that step involved in bringing stone in, you have far less sculpture than you have somewhere like here, right? St. Vigins, surrounded by flat-bedded, fine-grained, very biddable, workable, winnable stone. You've got a massive collection, you know, of European significance. Same at Meagle, lovely red sandstone, where you have a massive collection of stone. And then you get up into the granite areas, and there's wonderful sculpture, but there's less of it. But those places where you have good access to stone tend to have better collections.
Any theories as to how they were moving the stone? I know that's a big question.
Well, the funny thing is, if you go on a stonemasons forum of any kind and present them with the great questions of how did the Egyptians move stone, and people come up with ideas that it was aliens and all the rest of it, you'll never find that on a stonemasons forum, because stonemasons are. I'm not a stonemason, by the way. I'm a stone carver, but stonemasons are practical people. They know how to move stuff. There's a chap, Davey, that installs stones for us. He just knows how to move stone. You just give him a minute to think about it, and next thing is, he's come up with a plan. So, you can always. I mean, this has been a problem that's been solved by people all over the world throughout history of moving big, heavy objects. And we look at it in modern eyes and think, oh, how did they do it without a forklift truck and a lorry? But they just did, because they had ways of doing it and they knew how to do it.
Yeah. Problem solving again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there are ways of moving stone rollers or whatever. Get it on a raft, move it. And there's ways of moving stone.
Well, they were very much involved in moving things by boats, trading by boats, moving up and down the waterways, rivers, lochs, So
there's a site out at Loch Sween that I go to. It's an old quarry, and they think much of the stone from Iona and Islay and stuff in the late medieval period, Lord of the Isles sort of era, was coming from there. And you can see where they would pull up Aberlemno onto the shore, load the stone, and take it off to various places. No doubt stone would be valued, in that way. It's been having the qualities you were looking for. In this case, it's kind of bluey green. It's beautiful. Polishes well nicely. It carves well. It's flat bedded, and it outcrops vertically. So all you've got to do is crowbar it, and then roll it onto the boat.
Nice.
Yeah, it's cool. It's a very cool place.
Have to check that out. Right, I'm asking all the artists I'm going to see if you could travel back in time and ask a Pict who's carving a stone any question.
Well, it's the obvious one.
Assuming that you could understand each other.
Yeah, it's the obvious one. What do the symbols mean? What are you communicating? Where's the rule book? Where's the Rosetta Stone? Where's the thing that tells you how to pair those symbols up, and what are you expressing? That's the question. It's the biggest question. Yeah.
What's the story?
Yeah. Because it's the missing thing. We might never ever know, but we'll possibly just have to ponder that one forever.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time and
You're welcome.
your expertise and your insight into these amazing things.
Cool.
When I went to visit David at his studio, he showed me a missing Aberlemno stone. This is one that was very recently discovered, and it looks like this. When archaeological discoveries are made, interested museums put in a case for why they should be the ones to house them. If it's an object of national significance, then you get the big national museums putting a case forward. At the time we were making this podcast, the discovery of this missing Aberlemno stone was so new that the cases from different museums had only just been put forward. So, at this point in time, it is yet to be decided where this new stone will be put on display. However, time will tell where it ends up. After speaking to David, I had to stop in at the Meffan Museum in Forfar to explore their Pictish collection and speak to two of their experts about the stone.
Well, thank you so much for joining me and agreeing to do this interview for Curran Museum. I've got two wonderful people here.
My name's Susan Curran and I'm Heritage Learning and Engagement Lead at Angus Alive Museums, which basically means I'm responsible for programming, events, school visits, engagement, and delighted to have you here.
Thank you.
My name is Shaun Wilson. I am a visitor advisor here at the Meffan Museum and Art Gallery in Forfar. I am a graduate from the University of Aberdeen with a Masters in Cultural Heritage. I'm also a local historian. My work primarily focused on the Scottish witch trials.
Fantastic. And that's another fascinating subject as well.
Yeah. Not for today though.
So we're in Meffan Museum today, and I know that you have an amazing collection here of Pictish stones. I wonder if you could tell me a wee bit about your Pictish collection here at Meffan and beyond as well.
We have got several Pictish stones within our three museums, which is the Meffan here in Forfar, the Signal Tower in Arbroath, and the Montrose Museum in Montrose, funnily enough. Most of the stones are located here within the Meffan, but we do have a couple elsewhere, as well as some that are within our custody that are kind of out in the wild, so to speak.
Yeah.
We'll do also have some archaeology dating from the Pictish era. Not a terrible amount, but we do still have some. We've got a Pictish, what I'm going to refer to as a candle pot, that they used for, I believe, holding lights or candles within. We do have the kind of famous South Leckaway horse buckle on display, as well as some flint shards and stuff like that. But it's a very impressive collection of stones primarily.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
And when it comes to the stones, have you noticed any unusual patterns or anything on the stones in your collection?
Yeah, because the amount of stones that we have a lot of kind of the patterns that have mystified the people for a long time. We have some of the classics like the crescent and the Z-rod and double disc, but there are some other ones as well that I find particularly unusual, one of which is the Western Dunoon stone, which our antiquarians have kind of discussed it being a woman in a dress. And this dress pattern, it has a diagonal pattern on the shoulders as well as some kind of interlaced patterns on them. She's also wearing a large pennular brooch. It's one of the only depictions of a woman, I believe, that I've personally seen on Pictish stones, so that makes it quite rare as well. We do also have several animals in our stones as well. We have the famous Pictish beast, but we do also have several kind of deer and dogs as well.
Fantastic. Any theories as to what that Pictish beast is?
I personally think it's probably a sea monster of some description.
Yeah.
Dolphin, something that comes from the sea.
Yeah, my brain's along the similar wavelength. I think we know that the Picts like to capture their local environment and ecology in the stones. We have boar and wolves and horses and cattle that appear in stones, beasts that were native to the land when they were there. So I don't think it's far-fetched to say a dolphin or a whale. It could also be, if you want to go more into the realms of folklore, mythology, we've got plenty of stories across Scotland and Ireland and the Celtic world, but also here in Angus of kelpies.
Yes.
So it's certainly plausible it could be using the kelpie imagery to, warn kids away from lochs. Angus has a lot of lochs historically, so it could be that, but I'm not a Pictish art historian, so...
I think we're firmly in the camp that it's come from the water, though. We think it's water related, but we're no further forward than that.
That's quite alright. And can you tell us about some of the other stones that you were saying, some of them are out in the wild?
Mm-hmm. So one example, which is currently in storage at the Signal Tower, soon to be out in the wild, we have the Farnell Pictish stone, which was within our care, and we've been contacted by Farnell Church in the past, and we're currently figuring out how we can get the Farnell stone back out to where it was found at Farnell Church, kind of having discussions about how do we preserve this cultural heritage. There's quite a lot of rules and rules around it. You know, we can't have it outside because it's exposed to the elements and the stone will wither away. We have to think about if it's in the church, Church of Scotland's going through quite a rough patch just now. A lot of churches closing. What is the longevity of the stone there at the church? Will there be people to care for it? So that is kind of one example of a stone that we have that is soon to be out into the wild. So, yeah.
I would say that I feel there's an aspiration that we do show these in their original, station.
Mm-hmm.
That the stones, they maybe have been lost, their story or their context has been lost because of how they've been collected and then they've been put up in a museum. But it'd be great to have, not necessarily the stone itself, but a replica of the stone out in its original place. And then you understand it in the context of the landscape and all of the different natural features around it, as well as what would have been there in terms of communities.
Yeah, it's these Pictish stones are tangible pieces of cultural heritage from ages past, and you have to try and put things in their original historical context, and in the case of the stones, also their environmental context. That tells us where the Picts were, what they were doing, and the environment that they lived in that helped inform their beliefs in society. So that's really important as well. So you have to kind of, from a heritage student background, I would love to have stones out in the wild in that original context, but then you also have to think of what is the longevity of that. Is it safe to do that? Are we destroying cultural heritage in a sense by having the original stones out in the wild where they are exposed to the elements or potentially vandalism? And an example I'm going to cite, I live very nearby to Dunnican.
Yep.
We have the Dunnican stone in our museum, but there is a replica stone out where it would have been historically as well. So you can look at initiatives like that to where we can have a copy out in the wild, and the original safely preserved in the museum.
I think there's a lot of stones in Angus, isn't there?
Yeah.
And actually in the whole of Scotland, or the north and east of Scotland, that have to be packed up and made safe over the winter months, and the downside to that is that you can't see them.
Mm-hmm.
So it'd be great if there was a way to get that, and maybe augmented reality and all the sort of high-tech things that you can do now might make that possible. But it's disappointing when you go somewhere and you're desperate to see something, you've made a special trip and it's all covered up for its own safekeeping.
Absolutely. Aberlemno is
Aberlemno, yeah, it's exactly what I was thinking of.
They're incredible stones. They're amazing.
Phenomenal.
But and I can totally understand why they're boarded up to protect them. And but yes, it's not quite the same. And that's interesting that you're saying that, because I was going to ask you, how important you felt the landscape context of the stones was. So it's fantastic you answered that. One that I was thinking of would be, and it was David, the stone sculptor, who mentioned it, is the Camas stone, because where it sits, or where it used to sit, overlooks the water and looks on towards St Andrew's, the big abbey, the big cathedral thing there. And he had this theory, which I thought was really interesting, that if you're there, if you're up at that point, you can see St Andrew's. And it's almost like it was like a marker stone, potentially, for like a early Christian pilgrimage site, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, exactly. That's also my belief as well, that some of these stones were either markers for territory, markers for pilgrims, or perhaps even border stones perhaps as well for different territories. But their living environmental context is definitely super important and should be considered alongside the historical text when trying to decipher information about these stones.
But it's great, we've got a lot of fragments in our collection and you wouldn't be able to put them out in the landscape, so there is definitely a place for them in museums. And we get a lot of visitors that are interested in art and the development of art forms, and they can spend a long time looking at these fragments and they get a lot of information from them. So yeah, we like them in the museum, but we would like to see them represented in the landscape.
Yeah, which I think makes sense. It's interesting, this idea of kind of augmented reality or copies. There must be some kind of compromise. The other concern I would have, or do have, about the stones out in the landscape is, as you were saying, vandalism. And some of it is well-intentioned. Do you know, like for example, Tigna Kaya or Tigna Budach, a lot of people have, you know, cracked eggs on them and, you know, tried to make a kind of modern interpretation of a ritual around them. And in so doing, you know, with the best of intention, you know, are creating a bit of damage on these stones. And that's, I think, is something that to bear in mind as well.
Definitely.
Yeah. You can have amazing intentions, but you can still sadly contribute to the destruction of heritage. Another example, I've got a friend from university who worked at the Hermitage. A lot of people like to put coins in tree stumps as part of either kind of modern kind of neo-pagan practice or as a good luck charm. And he was telling me how it's really quite sad because the iron or the nickel in the coins ends up killing the plant or the plants around it. And so it's phenomenal that people are wanting to connect with these spaces kind of spiritually. But as you said, good intentions can still unfortunately lead to the destruction of heritage.
I know, it just popped into my head there, but it's even that idea of you throw in pennies into a well or a pond. It's really bad, it's really harmful, but we have a tradition that we do that for luck.
Yes, absolutely. And clitty trees as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fair enough if you tie up something that's got completely natural, you know, cotton that will actually rot away, which was the intention of it. But if you're tying something up that's like polyester, that's going to be there for a long time.
Yes, it will be.
Yeah.
It will be.
There's got to be a kind of healthy way for us to all.
There will be. We just need to. I think it will require perhaps some difficult but necessary conversations about, you know, from myself as like a agnostic historical background of like, what is the best way to preserve these sites and these stones? How can we compromise that with, you know, modern day either spiritual beliefs or people wanting to feel connected to a landscape? You know, there is probably difficult conversations, as I said, but I think they'll be necessary for long-term longevity of, because I think at the core both of anybody should be kind of concerned with the health of the landscape around it. So I think there's definitely a place to work together to achieve that.
No, I completely agree. Can you tell me a wee bit about some of the reactions that you get from visitors when they see your Pictish stones or part of your Pictish collections?
Do you know what I always think of is that some people have never experienced Pictish art before and they don't even recognise it as being real. You know, they sometimes think it's a replica. They don't. If it's new to them, you can get some quite amazed reactions from people because it's really quite exceptional. I mean, the quality of work that's in the stones is exceptional. Some of it is so fresh looking as well. So it's not aged particularly badly. Don't get me wrong, some of the stones have aged very badly indeed, but sometimes you get some quite amazed reactions and people are impressed by the way they can interpret them as well. You know, they can actually recognise stories, especially if they have an understanding of Christian stories. Sometimes they can recognise a story from the Bible in the stone itself. So I'm always quite
Yeah.
I love it when I meet someone that's never actually seen a Pictish stone before, and you get quite exceptional reactions to them.
Yeah, because I, in my work, deal with visitors a lot of very varied reactions. I think the Picts are very easy to kind of have this kind of outlander effect of very romanticised past.
That's true.
And so I've heard lots of weird and wonderful stories about the Picts and their art. Some of them, I would argue, are perhaps more historically plausible. Others, like they were made by aliens, a bit more far-fetched. But I've heard a lot of weird and wonderful kind of tales of people just trying to figure out from their own kind of worldviews what these stones may have represented, what the symbols might be. I've heard, people discussing it in terms of their artist background. I've heard people describe, well, they could be astrological symbols, they could be symbols related to hunting and game and kind of recognizing set paths. There could be parts of, a cultural identity. A stone could mark a Pictish king's land or a noble's land, telling the stories of great battles. I've heard almost everything people maybe think of.
It's fab. Something you mentioned there was about how artists react to it as well, and how they often react to it is by producing art. So we quite often have, as part of some of our temporary exhibitions, examples of art that's been inspired by the Pictish stones in our collection and out with our collection as well. And that can be varied, can't it? It can be all sorts of things. So it might be something worked in stone, could be ceramics, it could be painting, could be textile. So they interpret it and they get something out of that perhaps a non-artist or somebody that's not approaching it from an artistic point of view is getting from it. And it's great to think that these stones are still inspiring artists in creative people today, and they do.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the most amazing things about it. We don't have, unfortunately, a Rosetta Stone to tell us what the Pictish language was, but this is it's a universal language of making things, of artistry, of skill, and according to some scholars, these artists would be travelling, from place to place, and it's possible to kind of recognise specific artists' work in
Isn't that fab?
A variety of stones. Yes,
it's phenomenal.
That's amazing. I think it is. It's this, and the fact as well that they are the most enduring things about the Picts. The artistry that they left, the stones, that they left that kind of that maker's mark on the landscape. It's quite incredible. I love it.
I'm now thinking, will they find a Rosetta Stone dug down there? Is that the Gordon Noble aim, do you think, to get to find that Rosetta Stone?
The funny thing is that most of the people I've been speaking to are saying no, they don't think that we'll ever find that. The belief is that they're very much kind of like oral tradition.
Yeah.
Which makes sense. I mean, we, even today, we still have that oral tradition. But something that kind of troubled me about some of these conversations was that there's this belief that if we did find a Rosetta Stone to tell us exactly what all the symbols meant, that people would be less interested in the stones. What do you think about that?
From a heritage background, I definitely get that, because in the sense of part of the draw for study of the Picts is this unknown. So it's kind of like a free space for people to either craft their own stories, craft their own folklore and mythology, tell their own stories either through art or storytelling. And I think having a concrete answer, some people would feel quite alienated, I think, especially if they don't have that specific belief. I think it will also kind of limit creativity in a sense as well, because then you're giving a solid, hard answer. Don't get me wrong, as a historian, I would love a solid, hard answer, but very sympathetic to those whose own views kind of wouldn't align with that, because then it is a loss. It's a loss of storytelling potential. It's a loss of creativity, I would say. So yeah.
I'm not sure though, because now we understand hieroglyphs
We do.
and we still have many mysteries to solve.
We do indeed.
Even just in the last few days, they've just discovered some more tombs.
Mhm.
So many more questions to be answered and
Yeah.
riddles to be puzzled over.
Absolutely. And one of the things as well is that when I've been asking artists and makers, what is it you would like to know, what mystery you would like to solve about the Picts, quite often it is nothing to do with the symbols. Do you know? Like I spoke to two harpists,
Mm-hmm.
two clarsach players, and I was like, what would you like to know?
Oh, they would want to know what music they were playing.
They
Yes,
Yeah.
of course.
What music we're playing? Well, one of them said, teach me how to play.
Yes, absolutely.
And then the other one said, come and see my band.
Mm.
And
Tell
I
me
get
what
that
you think."
because when I was thinking about this as well, what do I really want to know about the Picts?
What do you want to know?
Well,
about
that's the
Picts?
thing. I love cooking and I love trying people's different, from different cultures, different recipes, and just to learn. So I would love to know. Give me your favourite recipe. What did you all like to gather round and have on a family holiday and things
Mm.
like that? Just that's what I would love to know.
Yeah. I would love just to witness their living culture, their everyday lives. I did sociology before I did heritage, so I would love to see what the people did, just in their boring day-to-day lives and the beliefs that enforced them. I want to see what a farmer did, what methods he used for tracking the seasons or knowing when to plant. I want to know how the harpists crafted ballads. I want to know how the elite ruled and the kind of lay people followed those rules. I want to know about the religion and
So
stories.
you want to know an awful lot.
I do. It's an issue. It will send me down massive rabbit holes and distract me from my own research. But
Well, say you had one question, so you were able to travel magically, Outlander style,
Yeah.
back in time for a day, and assuming that you and the Pictish person could understand each other, what would you ask them? What do you want to know?
I would love to know, bring it to our museum's context, I would love to know why the stones. What was the purpose behind them? Just a blanket why that I think would be my question. And it could be anything from, as we mentioned earlier, it could be art, it could be grave markers, boundary stones, telling the story of a king. I want to know their stories.
I want their favourite recipe. That's what I want.
You'll be thrilled to know, Susan, that I interviewed a food historian,
Yes.
and we're going to have a Pictish recipe.
Oh wow.
Oh, phenomenal.
So you'll be able to try.
I'll be able to get my wish. You won't get yours, Shaun, but I will get mine.
Maybe one day.
Maybe one day. Oh, that's amazing. And if there is something that you would really like for people to know about the Picts, or about your collection, what would you like people to know? What would you most like them to know?
I think I personally, from a heritage background, would like people to know just how close the Picts were with the other people living in Britain at this time. I've had a lot of comments, which I'm not going to make a political comment on, have a very set view of the Picts, which is, I would say, very isolationist and cuts a lot of conversations short about who the Picts were, about their lives and who they were interacting with. And we have a lot of archaeological evidence to show that the Picts were for centuries living and interacting with the Romans, especially as well the Irish Gaelic, centuries of them living together, quite possibly being a multi-language society. Their beliefs informing each other, intermarrying, especially among the elite. And so I would just like people to kind of know that a lot of the quote-unquote classical Pictish history is now kind of being disproven. They weren't completely isolationist. They were trading with the Mediterranean. They were living alongside the Irish. Okay, when the Vikings came, there was a lot of conflict there. And there was certainly conflict in and amongst the native Celts as well. But I think it's a far more interesting story of who exactly the Picts were and their folklore, their beliefs, and their lived lives and experiences.
Absolutely, and that they were like us.
They were like us.
They were just folk.
Just folk.
Just folk, Shaun, as we often say here in the Meffan.
Just folk.
They were just folk. But for me, what I would like people to get out of it is to explore the outdoors and the archaeological evidence in the natural landscape as well, because that gives me a tremendous amount of joy, and I think it's good for people's well-being as well.
Yeah.
Get out there, experience these stones, maybe not in the winter time when they're all packed
well.
up, but when it's on a nice sunny day, get out there and just marvel at them in the landscape, and allow yourself to be creative in your thought processes around it. Be inspired to create something on the back of seeing them, or maybe come up with a story about why it's there and who was around at that time and what they were up to, what they were cooking, what they were eating. What were they eating when they were sitting there?
What are you having for breakfast? That's wonderful. Well, thank you both so much for your time. Let's go and have a wee look at the stones. Okay, thank you so much.
As a wee bonus, Shaun Wilson of Meffan told us 2 stories about 2 separate stones in Meffan's collection, and I am putting these up separately for you to watch, and I hope that you enjoy them. Special thanks to all our guests for sharing their time, skills and expertise with us. Thanks to Grome House Museum for letting us explore their collections. Huge thanks to Debbie R. Moore for the wonderful sound design, and of course, special thanks to the Heritage Lottery Fund for their support in making this series possible.